All right. Anne Marie, should we get going? What do you think?
Yeah, we can. I was just seeing if it will let me grab the screen I want it to.
Tabs on tabs on tabs.
What? Me? Lots of tabs? No. Got
Definitely
it.
not. Definitely not.
I don't know what you're thinking. Never. Awesome. Well, welcome everyone. We're so excited to have you here. We are here with Sana, who's going to talk us through how we can navigate difficult conversations. Obviously, it's feedback time. Maybe some reviews are starting to happen. We think it'll probably be a very timely conversation and hope that it is very useful for everyone. So today's purpose is all about providing insights and strategies to help you go through and provide constructive feedback to those around you, help resolve conflict between team members, and also creating a feedback culture where it's psychologically safe for the whole team and everybody feels comfortable providing that feedback to one another. Session disclaimer. This is a community-led event, not hosted by Culture Amp specifically. And these sessions can get sensitive. We're going to be talking about things that may feel very big in our chests or in our hearts, and can make you uncomfortable, and that's okay. We hope that uncomfort makes us all grow. As we navigate these conversations, we want to create an inclusive environment where everybody can have those hard conversations and where this space is available to discuss big and bold topics with experts in the industry. Please, we will be sending out a survey asking for your feedback, and we would love to hear how we can improve if you have suggestions. And in general, if you feel like this was a useful session, we want to know that as well. We're excited for it to be engaging and for it to be fun and connective as well. We have 3 hosts today. I am Anne Marie Mills. I'm the Indianapolis Culture First chapter lead. So based in a very snowy winterland today. I've got snow globe effects happening outside my window as we speak. We also have Jesse Jacob and Ramita with us. So I'm going to hand it over to each of them to do a little intro, starting with Jesse.
Thank you. Thank you. Hey, squad. I'm Jesse Jacob. I use she, her pronouns. I'm based in Kansas City, Missouri. I am the senior community manager at Culture Amp. So I have the honor of supporting our 100+ global chapters and helping us to host these gatherings to create a better world of work. So grateful to be here and to learn from Sana today. Over to you, Ramita.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Anna Marie, as well, Jesse. And I'm glad to have Sana today. Hi, everyone. I'm Ramita Atik. I am the Berlin Culture First chapter lead and happy to be hosting our first event of 2024, starting off strong with this event. And yeah, without further ado, I would hand over to Sana.
Awesome. Real quick before we hand it over to Sana, we're gonna click in on what Culture First is all about. We are a group of people around the world united in the shared belief that a better world of work is possible. The Indianapolis chapter likes to say, how can we make work suck less? And we think that things like this conversation and making difficult conversations better for everybody involved is a step in that right direction. A couple of our core principles at Culture First, and this is across all of those 100+ communities that Jesse mentioned. We want to foster belonging and acceptance. We want to be willing to reflect and grow, have the courage to be vulnerable, put our learnings into action, and then connect inside and do business outside. So please do connect with the folks that you're going to be talking with. We're going to have small group breakout sessions, and we hope that those are really positive for each and every one of you. And we also hope that those are opportunities to put what we're learning today into action. It will require us all to be vulnerable and willing to grow and accept one another in the conversation. So all 5 of those core principles will come to life today. And we hope that you are able to stay with us for all of that. If you aren't, we are recording the session and we will be sharing that recording afterwards. So I know that's always a question we get and want to address that up front. So with that, I'll hand it over to Jessie.
All right, so I have the honor of introducing our speaker today, Sana Keshtkaran. I am really, really looking forward to this session. So a little bit of background about Sana. She is an executive coach and a trusted advisor for leaders and founders. She's known for her ability to help teams transform chaos into opportunities of growth. She has a decade of experience working with global leaders. She has a background in industrial organizational psychology, business analytics. She's coached and advised clients ranging from startups at the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center to Fortune 500 CEOs. She specializes in helping clients uncover their blind spots, unconscious spots, helping them to break vicious cycles and cultivate the mindsets and skills needed to lead high-performing, innovative teams. And I am grateful to call this human a friend. So over to you, Sana. Thank you so much for hosting us today.
Thank you so much, Jesse. Appreciate you, along with Anne Marie and Ramita, for hosting today's session. Thank you all for joining. Hello. I know there's a lot going on in the world, and wherever you are, I hope you're having peace and feeling safe. And really appreciate you being here. And I really hope that this session will be one where you'll get a lot out of it that you can apply to those feedback conversations that maybe you're having in the workplace right now. It is feedback season, as Anne Marie was sharing. And also, this is something that you can use in all areas of your life. We as humans have to deal with difficult conversations. It's inevitable. And I'm really hoping that this would be helpful for you. And before we dive deep, just some housekeeping things real quick. I would really appreciate it if you can have your videos on, and this would help with your own engagement and what you can get out of the session as well, so that you can participate with other participants in the session. And we are going to also have breakout sessions. We're going to have 2 breakout rooms, and highly recommend, again, if you do join those, it would be great so that you can hear from others what their best practices are, what have they found helpful or not helpful about all other potentially feedback frameworks that everybody uses, and the exercises that we'll have throughout the session. But if you're listening in and for some reason you're not able to join those breakout sessions, it's all good. You can still be in the session and stay in the main Zoom room when we send people out to breakout sessions, so that you can still get a lot out of the whole hour together. And we are going to be sharing a little bit about the neuroscience, what happens in the brain, why difficult conversations are difficult, and I'll share a framework that's been tested and proven, and it works great with you all, and then we'll wrap up with questions and answers. Does that sound good to you all? Should we get started? All right, great. So quick check with you all. What is one word that comes to mind when you think about difficult conversations, or when you hear difficult conversation or feedback conversation? Maybe type in the chat. Could be an emotion, could be a word. Stress, vulnerability, tension, unknown, anxiety, tension, anxiety. Yes, uncomfortable. Exactly. For others, awkwardness. For me, vulnerability, honesty, and directness. Thanks, Virginia, for sharing that. Would you be, not to put you on the spot, Virginia, but if you're open, I would love to hear a little bit more about how you experience that with vulnerability and honesty and directness. And you're welcome to unmute. No pressure. Also, if anybody else feels called to share about their experience, maybe what it is about difficult conversations that is anxiety provoking.
I'll go.
Please, Olivia. Hi.
I get a lot of anxiety because I've always had a fear of getting fired. Even like,
Mm,
as a middle schooler working through restaurants and professional, and I just always feel like these difficult conversations reflect that I'm doing poorly and the next step is being fired. And then my last job, I was actually laid off. I wasn't fired, but I was laid off. And so that really continues, it like perpetuated it. I'm like, perfect, wonderful. I have to be perfect all of the time.
so is it in a sense that you did have some fear and then it actually happened in real life? So then you realize, well, it seems like I do have to be prepared all the time. Is that
Yeah, I
how it
always
felt?
feel like it's on the verge of happening. And in
Mm,
my current position, my current boss, who I report to the CEO, he doesn't believe in feedback.
mm.
Point blank, doesn't think it's necessary, thinks people lie. And so he's, so that's healthy.
Very healthy. Yeah, I'm curious when you say he doesn't believe in feedback. I'm curious what would he believe in? Have you had a conversation with him
Not
ever
not
about
about
that?
my performance, and I've been here over a year.
Mm, mm. Oh, yeah. That can be a lot to deal with. Yeah.
Yeah,
We
so I just
will
assume.
also go over. Sorry, say it again.
I'm sorry, what was that?
Yeah, I missed what you said in the last part.
Oh, so I just assume I'm doing well until
Mhm.
he fires me.
Which is hard. Yeah, we will go shortly over some like statistics around feedback. That is not helpful. You need to know where you're standing, and even when feedback is shared, a lot of the times it's not specific. If it's not specific enough, if it's not timely enough, still not gonna help, let alone when we're not receiving anything at all. So
Okay.
I'm really hoping that the conversation today would help because I also want to point this out because this framework or just any feedback framework that is generally shared a lot of the times we focus on the person who gives feedback, but there's actually a lot of power in learning all of this as the person who receives it as well, or as a person who doesn't receive it, so that we can ask for it so that we know what a constructive conversation can look like and really feel empowered that way as well. Because we do have the power to course correct conversations when they're not going well. So, yeah, appreciate you all sharing. Do you want to share um, my screen real quick? All right. So, well, quick introduction about myself just before we go into the statistics. I've lived in several countries. I'm based in San Francisco Bay Area. I've lived in Iran, in Australia, in the US, and more recently a little bit in South America. And what I've noticed, the part that is very obvious is that regardless of where you are, you still have to deal with difficult conversations. But I've noticed that regardless of um, the specific location, there are some impacts that our culture has on the way that we perceive feedback conversations, the way that we approach them. And not that we're going to get too deep into cultural aspects of this and what's wrong and what's right, but it is true that there are some cultures that appreciate directness a little bit more. So they find it a little bit easier to go up to somebody and say, hey, we need to have a conversation. Whereas in some other cultures, it's more encouraged and common to read between the lines, to kind of be a little bit more indirect and still deliver the message. And that's more considered more polite. And this is particularly important because at workplaces, particularly, we know that people from all sorts of cultures and backgrounds are coming to work together and create. And when we want to create an environment that is psychologically safe, that is a feedback culture, we do need to take this all into account. That we're dealing with people who have very different preferences and the different upbringings and different ways of communicating. So. Throughout the session, you notice that we'll go through details that would make it hopefully applicable for most people. And to share some statistics on what's going on with feedback across the board in companies right now, mostly in the organizational setting. According to Gallup research, employees are 3.6 times more likely to strongly agree that they're motivated to do outstanding work when their manager provides daily as opposed to annual feedback. And again, yeah, this doesn't necessarily mean that even if the company does have the systems in place to provide frequent feedback, not everybody feels comfortable to share feedback on every single topic. There are some topics that are more sensitive. So yes, we want to provide more feedback. It's about the frequency, but it's also about the quality of the feedback. And some statistics that we have, again, from Gallup on quantity is that 28% of employees receive feedback a few times a year. 19% of employees receive feedback only once a year or less. And only 4.5% of managers agree that they're successful feedback givers, and only 26% of employees believe that the feedback they receive improves their work. So there is a lot of work to be done. We just heard also from Olivia how, yeah, there are also managers who don't believe in feedback, so we have to really start from the ground up. Before we dive deep into what can help with these conversations, we're going to have a breakout session. And again, if for any reason you can't join one, you're welcome to stay in the main room and continue with the session once everybody comes back. Get together, share your name, share a current scenario where you want to have a difficult conversation in the near future because you want this to be directly applicable to something that you're working with currently. And think of something, if anything, that scares you about having this conversation. And what scares you about not having this conversation? And what are you looking to get out of the session today that would help with that? So we'll also be sharing the prompts in the chat. We're going to have groups of 3, and you're each going to have about 2 minutes, so 6 minutes in total. And we're also going to have a timer on top so you know when you're getting back. Is the prompt clear and straightforward for everybody? Questions?
Awesome. Again, if you can't join the breakout rooms, all good. Just stay in the main session. Like if you're, doing laundry or I don't know, you're in commute or whatever, it's all good. Stay in the main session. We're just gonna send folks to rooms for a few moments. And so bear with us here. Okay. Starting to open rooms now. We'll see you back here in 6 or so minutes.
Thank you, Jessie. Jackie wants to share.
All right, everyone should be back here in about 10 seconds.
A good sign. Engaged. Welcome back, everybody. How was everybody's conversation? What is something that stood out to you in the conversation, whether hearing somebody else sharing what they shared or your own share as you were reflecting? Anything surprised you?
I can share.
Yes.
One of the people in our group shared about how it's not just a conversation about the business, but there's a person tied to it too.
Yes, it's also like really depends what type of personality is in front of you. How are they feeling about this difficult conversation? That definitely affects the whole environment. Yeah.
I think
What else?
just the complexity of some of the challenges. Those that were in our group, they were both pretty complex situations. They involved a lot of different key stakeholders. And what we seemed to align with most was just setting the intentions straight up front, being vulnerable, expressing kind of what you're looking to achieve through whatever conversations need to be have. And that way, despite how somebody may take it, you've already said how you intend for that conversation to go and, hey, I'm not perfect at this, but this is why I'm having this conversation because I care and I need your help, to lead to a positive outcome.
Yeah, such a good point. Yeah, we're going to talk about intentions and impact and basically the reason why we're talking about this, because there should be a good reason why we would put ourselves through a difficult thing like that is anxiety provoking for a lot and uncomfortable for, at the very least for most people. All right. So I'm going to share a little bit about what happens in our brain. Well, it makes total sense if you're out in the nature and we see a bird coming towards us, for our body and mind to kind of go a little bit tense and say, well, I'm here to protect you. We're either gonna be here, fight the situation, or run away. Again, the whole point of that is to protect ourselves. It could be an actual life-threatening situation. But where it's not super helpful is that our mind and body responds the same way when our manager walks in the door and say, hey, can we have a conversation? Or our partner says, hey, we need to talk. And then we start potentially overreacting or, depending on who the person is in front of us, what type of conversation we anticipate it to be, it can be a very stressful situation. So but the point here is that we don't always differentiate what's an actual life-threatening scenario versus just a conversation that needs to happen. And in those scenarios, what happens is that we experience what Daniel Goleman, who is an American psychologist, called amygdala hijack. When amygdala hijack happens, amygdala, which is this small almond-shaped part of the brain that is, in simple terms, responsible for the emotional part of our experiences, gets triggered. And when it gets triggered, it basically leads to overreaction to stress, which is the reason why when we overreact to stress, when we reflect back on some of those experiences, we have a hard time remembering some of the details as well. Because when we are overreacting to stress, then we can't really think properly and rationally. The other day, I was dealing actually with a scenario in my house where I was dealing with a small emergency plumbing situation. It was not a disaster, but I was panicking that it might turn into a disaster. So I couldn't even think in that moment to bring a bowl, put, where the water was leaking. All I was thinking how can I fix it? How can I fix this? So now looking back, I'm laughing because it's just kind of ridiculous that I couldn't even think to bring a bowl, but my mind couldn't really think when I'm overreacting to what's happening around me. So this is what happens in amygdala hijack. And the reason this is important is that we want to understand that, well, it makes total sense for my body to be going through this if it's an actual life-threatening scenario. But try to remember that this is happening in a feedback conversation. And later on, as I share the model that I will share with you all today, you'll see that I start with our mindset, with our presence, with the way that we go into these conversations. Because if you're noticing that we're in an amygdala hijack situation, we want to calm ourselves down. And there are so many different ways we can do that. There's meditation, there's maybe just stepping away from that situation if it's so heated that we can't have a proper conversation right now. But this is very, very important because unfortunately, a lot of difficult conversations or feedback conversations shut down in the moment when we enter the room. We don't even have to say anything, but we get our guards up or the other person's guards up because we know that, oh, there's this environment is tense and we're going to be dealing with something that is about me protecting myself and I have to get defensive. So super important to know what's happening. And when so the basic model that I want to introduce to you starts with the being as the first part of this acronym. So imagine I tell you that you're going to be a host tonight. You're going to have guests. I don't have to tell you so much about what a host does. You're immediately going to think, well, there are certain things that I'll do, and there's like a way of being that I'm going to have. There's certain things that I might say. Just as a host, it's a shortcut that you know what's going to happen. Whereas if I told you that you're going to be a guest, you're going to your friend's place and you're going to be guest, that's going to bring out a whole different type of presence. Again, in the way that you say you say things, you talk, and you know what you might do. And similarly, when we walk into a difficult conversation, there is so much power in deciding ahead of time, in a sense, making a mental decision around what type of being you want to have. And by that, I mean putting a label, putting some words to it. So, for example, when I asked one of my clients who was having a really difficult who was having a difficult time being assertive while also, you know, listening in a difficult conversation, she decided, you know what, I'm going to decide that I want to be an approachable leader in this conversation while also being assertive. So an approachable and assertive leader, and holding space for both of those in my own presence and in turn in that conversation with this person. So by that, you're kind of automatically take care of how we gotta talk, what type of things you're gonna say, when you might, you know, start just like listening because you also want to be approachable. You also want to be listening in that conversation. So this is the first step. The first step is all about checking in with yourself and really being honest with yourself. Is this the right type of being for this conversation, so that it can be a constructive one, so that it would be useful for all parties involved in the conversation. Then the next step is to genuinely gain permission and ask if this is a good time for them to be involved in this conversation. It doesn't necessarily have to be permission to share feedback. It could just be, hey, there is a conversation that we need to be having about such and such topic. And is this a good time? And if really is not, trust that they're telling us that this is not a good time and find another time for it. Or maybe they might need another setup for this. This is also important. Whether it's going to be face-to-face, whether it's going to be in person or over the phone, all of this can be talked about and, you know, take into account other people's preferences. And I also want to pause here real quick and share that while we're going over this model and the order is important, I would like to say that depending on the context, we also talked about depending on the person who is in front of us and the type of complexity that Jason was also talking about, we might decide that, hey, we might want to do something before the other one. Ideally, I would think that checking our being is a critical part that we want to do always, regardless of where in the conversation we are. But we might decide, hey, we want to share about our intention and why we're having this conversation early on. But intention comes up a little bit later as well. And the third one is about being specific. So what this means is that if there was a camera in the room, whether it's a Zoom room or a physical room, what would the camera in the room capture that we can talk about right now? So a bad example of this would be if I went around and say, hey, you were really rude. You've been really rude to me. It doesn't tell the other person what rude specifically means, according to what culture I'm talking, I'm saying they were rude to me. When did this behavior happen? What was the behavior? It's very vague and blurry. And it makes sense if the other person who's hearing this gets offensive and like, I'm not rude, how dare you call me rude? So a good example of that to make it very specific is to say, hey, I noticed you interrupted me a couple of times in our stakeholder meeting yesterday. So that is specific. We know which meeting we're talking about. It happened in a meeting and what exactly was the behavior. And if there was a camera in the room, it could capture that somebody or that person interrupted me a couple of times. And by the way, we could have multiple cameras in the room.
Oh, what are
Because
you up
cameras
to?
can be, we could be having multiple cameras in the room capturing from different angles. So we do want to take that into account for later stages of this, conversation, so that we want to hear, well, this is my camera. Maybe their camera captures something else. That other angle might be something else. I want to pause here real quick and see if there are any questions so far, anything that needs a little bit more clarification before moving on with the rest. Anything clear? All right. Did I hear? Oh, Holly, please.
Just a quick question. Because if in the situation, the context and meetings, by default in the culture, maybe putting on masks. And so when this camera thing could go for or against, it could be how are you not being yourself? How are you performing? And when is it the real important conversations are when you take the mask off and you speak genuinely from a place of compassion and heart. So what coaching advice would you be on the different angles of the camera? The camera is, setting aside the performance and yet also knowing that you're being evaluated a lot of times in these situations as well for performance.
Yeah, really good question and point. That is a big part of why I really believe that having that being in early on or before we go into a conversation is so important, because the way that we show up in a conversation most of the time, if not all the time, really impacts the way that the other person can also show up. I'm not saying just because you're showing up with authenticity and compassion that guarantees that the other person does, but it does definitely make it a little bit easier for them. It can be more permissive for the other person to also be like, oh, it seems like Holly is being really authentic in this conversation. As I think it was Jason who was talking about this, how they might say, or maybe somebody else, sorry, if I don't remember who it was, that said, I can say, hey, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't exactly know how this conversation might go, but I'm here with this intention. And so that can hopefully bring the guards down to say, we're here not to fire anybody or not to threaten anybody. And that can be a very inviting approach. But the other thing I would say is, and this is important because it could even be on the receiving end when we might notice that, hey, this conversation is like being very heated. We're not being very authentic here. You can also course correct that by noticing by basically reading the room, by noticing what type of energy we're dealing with right now. I'm noticing that their body language or facial expression is kind of tense. They're feeling like they're a little bit threatened. So you may decide that maybe this is not the right time to have this conversation. Or most of the times I would say, when in doubt, just ask. If you're feeling there's something, like if it's like the elephant in the room or there's some energy, chances are they're feeling it too. So find a way to ask the question and be curious and say, hey, I'm sensing maybe, there's something off in this conversation. Is there something that you need to share before we can move forward? Because I want to make sure that this feels safe for you as well. Does this help? Yeah, really good question. Thank you. Anything else? Any other questions? All right. So the next one that that we've already touched on a little bit is impact and intention. So again, this is an example of what you can potentially bring to the forward, like after you check your being, as you ask if they're okay to have this conversation, you might say, hey, this is my intention for this conversation. And intention and impact can go hand in hand really nicely together. And the reason by default I introduce it after the actual specific feedback is you can share what the specific feedback is and then share the impact of their behavior or the impact of that specific thing that you've noticed, so that you can then elaborate on it here in this space where you're talking about what they've done, the impact of what they've done, and then what the positive impact could be if that behavior change happened. So an example of this could be, so I noticed you interrupted me in our stakeholder meeting a couple times yesterday. And I wanted to share this with you because I just lost train of my thoughts in that conversation, and we almost lost a deal. And I really want to make sure that we are on the same page with this and talk through the flow of our conversations in next, similar meetings, so that in that, brief period of time that we have with the stakeholders, we get to all our points and we don't feel rushed. And, whatever that you think happened, the impact and the intention, and it can be the impact that happened in the past and moving forward. But the other thing that research findings have shown us that good feedback is not only specific and timely, and it's also very forward thinking. It's not just about one thing that people don't like about feedback, and one of the reasons they avoid it is that it can feel to some people like it's just nagging and complaining, and you're just bringing negative energy. Whereas when we make it very specific and strategic, and also talking about, well, I want to make sure that I have a really strong relationship with you. This is actually the reason why I care so much about our working relationship together. So I want to make sure that I'm sharing this feedback with you so that you can do the same with me when I'm not doing, I'm not operating the best way that works out for all of us as a team. And having all of these conversations all the time and making it as a part of everyday conversation is what makes a culture, a feedback culture. So a feedback culture is not just one where we just share feedback. Doesn't really also matter how frequently we do. It's about our mindset and approach towards feedback. And the other thing that makes feedback conversations really, a big part of cultures is that we're not only sharing things when things are going bad, when it's only constructive feedback. We can follow the same thing when something positive happens. So an example of that could be, hey, really appreciated how you shared an example of how we could support our clients in such and such example, because in our previous meeting with them, it seemed like they knew what it looks like on paper, but not exactly in practice. So it's also very helpful in sharing positive feedback, that we're not just sharing good job or great work. We also tell them what exactly was helpful and what impact it had. And last one, and then the other reason I want to share why it's so important to talk about why, and there's applications of this in marketing in all sorts of different areas. There is research that was conducted a long time ago in 1978 at Harvard by Ellen Langer, and this was the study of the power of the word because. So this was back in the day where people didn't have access to copy machines at their homes, so there would be lines at universities to make copies. And so in this research, they categorized people in 3 main groups, and they had all these people in all 3 groups cut in lines where people were in line to make copies, and they had people use different lines as they were trying to cut the line. The first group said, "Excuse me, I have 5 pages. May I use the Xerox machine?" The second group said, "Excuse me, I have 5 pages. May I use the Xerox machine because I have to make copies?" And people in the third group said, "Excuse me, I have 5 pages. May I use the Xerox machine because I'm in a rush?" So the first one, there's no because. The second, the 2 other ones, they do have because in the statement. The first one, just a just a statement that comes after because, and then the third one does have an actual reason. And what they found is that in the first scenario, there was a 60% compliance to this request. And I would love to hear from you, maybe in the chat. What are your guesses around how the rate changed from this first example to the second and third? And hint, the second and third one, the rate was pretty similar. So whatever number you share, you can apply to both. What do you think? Increased, yeah. Might you guess also to what rate? Maybe a number you can share from 60% to what? 80%, 90, 80 to 90. A lot of people around 80 and 90, 75. 90%. Cool, yeah, very close. Depends on the because. If it's something I don't agree with, I might not let them. Yeah, well, you're someone who actually listens. A lot of people don't. They're like, there's because in the statement. Great. All right, so it was 93% and 94%. So very, very small difference in, if the reason actually made sense or not. But the point is, it did increase by more than 30% when you did actually use the word because. So people do really want to know, what the reason is. And marketers also use this all the time. You may have noticed in those marketing emails that they say, you need to register for this or sign up for this or buy this product because, and then what they use after because it may make sense or may not. They might say we have, limited options, but it might always be limited. So it's used frequently. So that's about the power of why. And the last one on the acronym, which is the C, is to be curious. And again, this is something that you want to have with you from the beginning to the end, but particularly toward the end, after you've shared what's going on, what do you think happened, make it very specific, along with the impact and intention, you want to give it back to them and give the space back to them and see what their camera maybe captured. So this can look like some of the languages that I really like. It could be help me understand what's going on here, or help me connect the dots, or I'm curious, how do you see this? Or how did all of this land for you? I'm curious about your perspective on this. But of course, depending on the exact scenario that you're dealing with, you can tweak it however you want to make it super specific in the way that you're curious. But it's also not a bad idea to keep it in general and keep it general so that there is enough spaciousness in that conversation for them to pick it up wherever they also feel it's comfortable for them. I also think that there's also room for curiosity, like for that spaciousness to be present very early on. Maybe you want to hear from them first. Maybe there's like a context where you have no idea what happened. You don't have that much specificity around what happened, but you just know that there's something going on. So you might want to just like check, hey, I'm curious. I've been noticing, there's seems like something is being off. I'm curious what's going on. So you can have that curiosity along the way, but if you're following this particular order, it works beautifully when you just pause there and let them digest and refer back and get back to you on what's going on. And on that, it's also important to notice for yourself and then also for the other person in front of you, or if you're having a group conversation, to empower people to take time to themselves if they're not in a situation right now or in a state of mind where they can have a conversation right now that they've heard the feedback. They may want to take time, digest it. It's actually a lot of time a good sign of maturity that they don't want to just be there in a conversation with you just to say something back. And if you find yourself in that scenario where you feel like, well, there's been a lot thrown at me, I have no idea how to respond, or I don't feel like I have the right response right now, I want to think about it, especially for the introverts, wanted to empower you that you can say, thank you so much for sharing all the feedback. I want to take some time to digest, to reflect on this and get back to you. It's really important that we do as much as possible share maybe a timeline, or we do share that we are going to take time, as opposed to just leaving the space and just take time without acknowledging it. it sets the expectations right for the other person that they're taking time, and that's perfectly fine. And we're going to go back to our groups right now. We try to put you back in the same groups, but it may be a little bit different. And if that's okay, if that happens, that's okay. But go back to this scenario that you identified in the beginning, the conversation that you want to be having, and go through these questions. Is there anything you'd apply from the framework you just learned? Which one do you think you're the best at, and which one needs more working on? And how might that change the feedback experience? And before we go into breakout sessions, if there are any questions about the rest of the model that I just shared, happy to take some time now. Feel free to raise your hand.
Can you go back a slide so I can take a screenshot of the model?
Yes, we will also share this in the chat. Wait, no, here it is. All right. Ready for breakouts? All right, let's go, Jesse.
Right, opening up the rooms again. Again, if you can't go into your room for whatever reason, if you're doing laundry or dishes or you're driving, just stay with us in the main room. For the rest of you, we'll see you back here in 7 minutes or so. All right. Welcome back, everyone.
Welcome back.
Hello.
Yeah, I did want to share before hearing from all of you, because we were having a conversation about permissions in our little group. And something about permissions is that sometimes it might look like permission, asking for permission. Sometimes it might look like a heads up, because, you know, at the organizational level, maybe layoffs are happening. And it's not so much of like asking for people's permission if we can lay you off. It's more of we want to let you know that there are changes happening. And what's really important is creating a balance of how much is too soon of a heads up also, because sometimes that can also create a lot of anxiety if you're telling people a month in advance that, hey, layoffs are happening, without giving them anything that they can, you know, any useful thing that they can do with it. But I will also say that people have different preferences. So if you're working with a team and it's not necessarily the whole organization, it's really nice if you can hear, if you can ask for everybody's preferences. Hey, do you prefer to be told ahead of time if something is happening? Or are you one of those people who prefers to know kind of last minute? So then, you know, you can just like deal with that change last minute. So knowing as much as possible what people's preferences are, and also the method of delivery and receiving feedback can also be really helpful. There's so much, you know, of course, shared about feedback should always be done face to face. And while I think that's really good, that's one of the best practices, sometimes it gets in the way to the point that people might avoid conversations and avoid difficult conversations. They might say, you know what, if it's face to face, I'm just not having it. So use your judgment. Maybe it makes sense with somebody that, you know, if you know that they're going to make themselves more available on a phone call, maybe a phone call would be the way to go. So we don't want to make any rigid rules about it always has to be this way. It's more of best practices. And I also want to share a quote from somebody that I've learned quite a lot from through his book and also his master class, Chris Watts, who is a former FBI hostage negotiator. Highly recommend his book, Never Split the Difference, or the master class on negotiations. And the reason I really like his framework around negotiation is that it's not about manipulating others or, you know, forcing anything. So let me read the quote. It says, negotiate in their role. Persuasion is not about how bright or smooth or forceful you are. It's about the other party convincing themselves that the solution you want is their own idea. So basically meaning that instead of thinking, oh, we're just gonna split the difference. You share what you want, and I share what I want, and we're gonna go with 50% of what you want and 50% of what I want, and call it a win-win scenario. Instead, no, let's actually sit down, have a conversation. Let's see what we can co-create together that would hopefully, when we both leave the session, we will know that, you know, it's appropriate, it's applicable for both of us. And with that, I do want to share it. I do want to open the space for all of you to ask any questions that you might have. And these are my links, and we'll also share in the chat as well if you want to get in touch. If you want to have other questions, have conversations, I'm open for that. But I do want to hear from you all on how your conversation went in the group session and any questions you might have.
I'll go. One of the things that I shared with my buddy Michelle is one of the things that worked really well for me is I mentioned in the chat that my manager asked me, you know, when I was onboarded, how do you like to receive feedback? And, you know, I was like, oh, I don't know. I've never been asked. I've never thought about this. So that was really helpful. But then the other thing that she built in was we would have weekly check-ins, which was already part of their framework. But in those weekly check-ins, she would have, it was kind of part of our, I don't know, icebreaker, like, let's do glows and grows. So she would do one thing that, you know, or she would say something that I did really well that week, or acknowledge, you know, some kind of praise, and then a grow, like what's something that she noticed, or, you know, whatever, something that some form of small feedback. And I think practicing that, so sometimes it felt tedious, like, okay, is this really necessary? But it was helpful because then when we had to have those bigger conversations, those bigger moments of feedback, we had already established that trust and that psychological safety to know, like, oh, okay, she doesn't hate me. She's not trying to, you know, she's not going to fire me. She, you know, we had built that trust in order for me to kind of let down my guard and listen to what she had to say. And then, sorry, another thing that I wanted to add was so I have ADHD, and rejection sensitivity dysphoria is a real thing. And so you know, when I receive feedback, I often like extra spiral out and create these like elaborate stories. Like it feels I don't know, very intense in my body. And so I think it's also helpful for other non neurodiverse people to understand that yes, feedback is difficult for everybody. And also there's this extra added level of intensity that comes with feedback for the neurodiverse population.
Really appreciate it, Stephanie. Yes, really good points about first one and second one about trust, that you're building trust along the way. Trust is built in very small moments and how you're navigating everything, not just, you know, that particular difficult conversation. And it makes the other person comfortable the other time when you're having another one. And also about, yeah, the sensitivity, the extra sensitivity that can come to people for all sorts of reasons. And that being one of them. And we want to be mindful of that. Just another reason why we want to ask for feedback. Jesse, yes.
Okay, I have feedback about feedback. This is like super meta. So this is actually, so Stephanie, who just shared, she's our chapter lead for Houston and for the mental health and neurodiversity chapter. And she and I have been working through a lot of stuff. And so we had a conversation recently, and she actually, like, you did this, Stephanie, when we met. You were like, are you open to some feedback on something? And I was like, oh, yeah, let's go there. And I thought, like, just going through this model, like, you asked for it, which is like already you're applying this. So like something you're already really great at. But then the way that I appreciated your feedback is that something I said to her, she said, this was, I know that this wasn't your intention and I understand your intention, but here's the impact of the specific language that you used in that conversation. And that to me was like, oh, wow. Like, thank you so much for one, like that you felt comfortable sharing that with me. But also there's a difference between like well, you said this and this is how it made me feel, versus like, hey, I understand that this like probably wasn't your intention, but the way that you use this language did have this kind of impact on me. I thought was really powerful. So anyway, my reflection on going through this model and appreciation for you, Stephanie.
Thank you. I appreciate both of you for
Appreciation
sharing.
for you, Jesse.
Mhm. I know we're at time. I'm totally cool to hang out a little bit afterwards, but I do want to make sure that our co-hosts also share their announcements. But if anybody wants to stay for a little bit longer and we can continue the conversation for a few more minutes afterwards, totally open to that. And thank you so much, all of you again, for being here and for the wonderful co-hosts for hosting me.
Okay, I love this. I'm just going to share a couple other things in here in case it's helpful. Other amazing research that Culture Amp has created, very similar to the stuff that Sana has been talking about. This formula around the effective feedback formula that we use at Culture Amp, like the situation, the behavior, and the impact it had. There's a QR code on here as well. Also some really amazing, there's a great blog post on giving effective feedback and how it actually improves the employee performance and how ineffective feedback can have the reverse effect. And actually, if we're creating organizations where employees can give upward feedback to their managers and their leaders, actually can have create for a better employee experience. So sharing this, we'll share in the resources afterwards. This is all very similar to the things we learned from the basics model, but around like the timing, asking people if is this the right time to have this conversation, preparing for it, like why do I need to have this feedback, specific actionable things. I really love this little point about like blocking time at a regular cadence to ensure that you're actually giving feedback, even at your one-on-ones, can be really powerful. And then, yeah, lastly, not being afraid to share your feedback with your manager or your leader. So anyway, there's that in case it's helpful and a little research in your toolbox. Definitely stay connected to our digital community if you want to keep the conversation going in there, in our People Geek Slack community. So check us out in there. There's lots of people sharing jobs and research and resources and all sorts of amazing stuff happening in there if the Slack community is your thing. Some upcoming events. I'm personally really excited about this. If you really knew me, you'd know that I'm a giant nerd for stand-up comedy, and I went and met this amazing comedian recently named Sammy Anzer, and we're hosting a roast in February about workplace culture. So if you want to join us and you want to try stand-up comedy about workplace culture, great. Or if you just want to come and like see, bring your tea, bring your popcorn, and just like watch other people roast how ridiculous our industry is. Would love for you to join us at this. This will be sent up in the follow-up email as well, but really looking forward to that. And then we have all sorts of upcoming events happening as well with dealing with toxic behavior at work, embracing neurodiversity, and the science of playful culture. And you can scan this QR code. It'll take you to the entire community's calendar of events. All right. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And any questions about any of that stuff? Cool. All right. Well, can we give Sana a little love? Can we just like come off mute if you're in a place where you can, or give some love in the chat? Just like, can we give Sana a little applause, a little love?
Thank you all. Appreciate it. Thank you for joining.
Pew, pew, pew.
I
Exactly.
hope this was helpful for you all. And we are also going to send out a feedback survey. I would love your feedback on the workshop about feedback. These are really helpful. If I could hear from you, it's the only way we can improve these workshops. So I appreciate that.
Sana, I do have a question if you are willing to stay on.
Yes, I'm going to stay on. If anybody needs to
Thank
leave,
you.
that's totally cool. But yeah, I'm going to be here.
Wonderful. Thank you all.
Yes, please.
I find that there's a culture at my company, we're pretty small, we're 120 people, where people default to HR. They want HR to solve all their problems, including conflict resolution between two employees. And we're really pushing hard back against that to equip managers and to equip employees. But I would just love any advice you have there, because one of the things we often get is the like, I feel like I'm a victim, and now you're putting the onus on the victim to go and do the hard work to have the crucial conversation. And I don't always know how to respond to that, or what the right framework is to help them understand why it's actually not doing them a service to have HR step in every case, unless it's something super egregious, obviously.
Yeah. Yeah, no, thank you for the question. If you send me your email, I'll share 2 articles with you, but briefly about that is, as much as possible, we don't want to get into that type of setup, because what it creates is what we call triangulation, or the drama triangle, where, as you mentioned the word victim, there's going to be one person that's going to be the victim, and then there's the other person that is the bad person, and then the bad guy, and then the other person who's going to be the rescuer. And once we get into that triangle, it's all going to get even more dramatic and not helpful. Instead, what we want to do is to empower the person who comes to HR and sit through a conversation with them, and see what are the things that they've done already, what are the things that maybe they're thinking of, but they feel like maybe they don't have the power to do that, or they're not in the position to do that. Because unfortunately, it's not always that people just want to go to somebody else. Sometimes they think that's the right way to do it. And so, as people who are in L&D and HR, the more education that we can do on that no, we actually want you to feel empowered to figure things out on your own, it would be helpful. I also think it's really helpful to share, models like this, or any other model that you believe in, with them, again, as part of resources you can share with them, so that they know that's the way to do it. And I think what I've seen is that the more it's done, the more you tell them that this is how we want to do it, how we want to build a feedback culture, and maybe that, then people are gonna start feeling a little bit more comfortable. Because once you build that feedback culture, then everybody look around and say oh, everybody's having this conversation. It's not just me. So it's going to take a little bit more investment in the beginning, but the more you avoid stepping in, the more it's gonna kind of create that norm. Does that help?
Yeah, that helps. I mean, it's affirming to hear you say that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think when you get pushback, just having that same message that you can say over and over of the why behind empowering people instead of stepping in, I think is really strong. And then holding up our own mirror, like I saw someone put in the chat, have we equipped them enough? Because that's another thing that comes up. I don't feel equipped to do this. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, also going back to how our brains work and how we get into that fight or flight whenever we're having a feedback conversation. It's true, even if you want to give feedback, it's not just on the receiving end, because it goes back to our whole sense of belonging. And from an evolutionary perspective, we just get triggered. So the more we change our perception of what this feedback conversation means, it doesn't necessarily mean, hey, I'm threatening you with something, you're bad, or you did something bad. Then it's going to get a little bit more normalized over time. But yeah, that's a tricky one, to be in that space where everybody's coming to you and asking you to step in. Thanks, Meg.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. What other questions are there? I'm also curious, are there other feedback models that people are used to applying? What are some things that you like about them, some things that work well for you or don't? Because that's the other thing that people sometimes find confusing. We're used to our own way of handling conversations, and sometimes it can feel contradictory. Then opening up space for that conversation too.
I love
I'll go after Jesse.
Oh yeah. I love conscious leadership groups, the clearing model.
Mm,
Like that is my jam.
yeah.
Um,
Mm,
I don't know that like for some kind of what I mean, obviously like the drama triangle, that's also through a
yeah.
collaborative group thing. But like what are the facts? Like what actually happened? What's the story I'm telling myself? How am I feeling as a result of that? And then what do I actually need as like moving forward, like my wants and my needs? I just feel like that model has really been helpful and served me.
I love that model, especially the part, yeah, when you said this story that I'm telling myself, just like in any scenario, even if you're just in a conversation with yourself, acknowledging that there is a story involved here that may or may not be absolute truth. It's so powerful. Thank you, Jesse. Yeah.
Oh, I forgot what I was gonna say. Oh, I don't know that I like use a model specifically, but I think one thing that I did want to kind of ask and see what how the group felt is um I don't know, sometimes the way that people deliver feedback, it feels disingenuous. Like it feels like they're following a model, and I don't like
Mhm.
that either. I think someone brought that up earlier in terms of just having like empathetic conversations, and less about it feeling like, okay, I can, like, feel you going through the steps as you're telling me these things. Um, yeah, I don't know
That
if better
that's
for
how I
you?
Yeah.
feel about the sandwich model. I'm not a fan really, unless it's like a specific situation where I did a task and you could give me positive, negative, and positive about that thing. Otherwise, I feel like they're hiding the negative feedback with two other positive things unrelated. Like, oh, you do this good at your job. This could be better, but you do this
Mm,
really well. And I just feel like it is disingenuous and lazy. Again, unless it's very specific, because typically, we want feedback every day. And in my experience, the sandwich model is typically used to hide something that they're uncomfortable sharing alone. But if you're giving feedback every day, then I should have gotten that positive feedback already. And now it's
mm.
time for the negative.
Yeah. It also that the sandwich model can actually communicate that yeah we're not comfortable with transparency here and we need to add like all these like fluff so that I can talk to you and yeah we don't want to encourage that and it can be very confusing. We don't know like should I be focused on the positive on the negative which one. And I really like your point, Stephanie, too, that yeah, this model and all other models, the point of them is to kind of just bring some preparedness or some framework to the mindset that you can think through things. But if you're just being so rigid that it gets to a point where we're not being genuine, then it defeats the purpose in a sense. Yeah. Well, thank you all so much for joining. If there are no other thoughts, reactions, questions, happy to wrap up.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Jesse,
Everyone.
Ramita, and Mary for hosting, and everybody else for joining. Thanks, Jason, for your input. Olivia, everybody.
Well done. Thanks.
Bye,
Thank you all.
squad.
Have a good one.
Cheers.
Bye.